all,
Sorry.
all appropriate. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's just, can you allow me to share screen or share host?
Sure, I'll do that. Try that, Charles.
There we go, that's perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to tell you about the shortest 6-week holiday ever. It was supposed to be 6 weeks. It started on the 8th of March last year. And you will all remember what was happening last year around the 8th of March. And obviously we didn't get the memo, or we didn't read it, or we didn't take it seriously enough. And on the 8th of March, when New Zealand had 5 COVID cases, we set off on a 6-week holiday. We've got, like many New Zealand families, we've got relatives, family members in Cape Town in South Africa and London. We were going to visit them all, and we were going to start off with a 10-day safari in Tanzania, in an area called Serengeti and Ngorongoro, which is right in the heart of Africa. And this is the story of that. We were back in 10 days, but I'll get to that. And we started getting the first inklings that we hadn't read the memo properly when we were just about the only people on the plane to Bangkok and had the plane to ourselves, and then got met by this very sci-fi looking reception committee at Bangkok airport. And even back in 18 months ago, the masks were everywhere. The only two ways to get to Serengeti. One is with Ethiopian, and one was with KLM, the Dutch airline. They don't do that anymore, but that I'll also talk about a little bit. And to get to Serengeti, you have to fly through a town called Arusha. And which is in Tanzania, if you draw a line from Cape Town to Cairo, and from the bulge of Africa to the Horn of Africa, those two lines intersect in Arusha. And there's a sign in the middle of the town saying the heart of Africa, and it really is. And we flew through Addis Ababa in Ethiopia and on to Arusha. So it was quite a tortuous trip. And there we were met by a wonderful gentleman, Festo, and tourism to Serengeti and the whole conservation area around Serengeti is by far the biggest revenue earner for that part of Tanzania. So being a tour guide is really quite a senior job, and Festo had a big house and 3 kids that went to private schools. And Festo and Sue, who you can just see a shadow of there, and I headed off into the bush in that rather impressive looking vehicle, just the 3 of us. And on the way, we passed some ladies working their family farm, and we were absolutely fascinated to see that there are no tractors or anything. You just get out your hoe and go and hoe your row, so to speak. Being with Festo was fantastic, because being a local, he had lots of contacts all over the place. And he took us to meet these friends of his. These are Maasai, and they're an interesting, very interesting people. They don't have passports. They're nomadic. They move around between countries. They started off in the Sudan thousands of years ago and migrated down through Ethiopia and Somalia. And now they sort of migrate around in between Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda. They, in terms of Western technology, they live a very simple life. No electricity, no running water, they move their abode from time to time, which I guess means abandoning this and going to a new place and building another one. We spent nearly an hour, or maybe a little bit more than an hour, inside the hut with this delightful young man, and that's as much light as they have in the hut. And the hut has one sleeping platform made out of earth for the man of the house. It's a patriarchal society. And another sleeping platform for the mum and all the kids. And that's kind of it. They have very protein-based diets. They either have blood or milk for breakfast. And they are they're herders, so they get blood. They make a hole in the side of the cattle's neck in the jugular, and they take blood out of the jugular into a jug, and then plug it up with a plug for tomorrow. And they alternate mornings blood and milk, and they have meat every night, and then just tend to have a smallish lunch. On the whole, they discourage education, unlike other parts of the world where girls don't get educated. Mostly for everybody, Western Western oh, I see what's going on. Western education is issued, and he escaped because there was a public servant, somebody from the Ministry of Education, wandering around when he was skiving off behind a tree from his herding duties, and basically kidnapped him and sent him to a government boarding school. So he's the only person in the village who is educated, and the only person in the village who can speak English, but he was very interesting. And this is how they make fire. I'm not going to run this whole video because unsurprisingly, it takes some time to make a fire in this way. But every day in the morning, they get up and they make the fire and they keep it running for the whole day. You can see it's a team effort. And then this is an elaborate, oops, I'll go back to that. This is a somewhat elaborate courting ritual, but the girls pick the boys based on how high they can jump. Oops. It's me getting some education on how to hold my stick. I still have that red blanket, but was unable to attract another wife, so I'm stuck with Sue. So this whole area is in a part of Africa called the Great Rift Valley. If you have a look at Africa, the Horn of Africa, which contains Nairobi, Kenya, Somalia, Ethiopia, Djibouti, is actually breaking away from Africa and will ultimately drift towards the Middle East. And that process has created this Rift Valley that runs from south to north, from basically Lake Malawi, close to Zimbabwe, right up into Ethiopia. And this is Lake Manyara, which is part of the Great Rift Valley structure. And then I've got a lot of animal pictures, which I will go quite quickly through, but these are a couple of little baboon teenagers having a fight. And the one thing about watching game in this area is it's so close to you and completely fearless. There are no fences anywhere in Tanzania. So no game reserve has a fence around it, no residential area, which I'll show you, has a fence around it. The animals are free to roam everywhere. And they have a wonderful concentric system. So Serengeti itself is a national park, but outside that, there's a conservation area, and outside that, there's a game area. And the rules that pertain are really quite interesting because they have worked out how to have local people farming and tourism live happily side by side. And the core of that system is this graduated protection of animals. So animals are completely protected in a national park, and no one's living there. In a conservation area, the animals are still protected, but people are living there as well. And the way they deal with the conflict is if anyone's animal has, anyone's domestic animal, cow, sheep, goat, has been killed by a wild animal, the government will pay them out for that animal and a profit. And they also are encouraged and incentivized to look after the area. And I must say, just as an aside, we were very, very impressed by the level of engagement and professionalism in the whole Tanzanian tourism system. Wherever we were, we knew exactly what the situation was, how long we were going to be there, how much was included in what we paid for the hotel, what tips might be needed, what was going to happen next, and so on. So clearly, they've done a lot of training and it works well. That's what we stayed in each night, not that particular one, but they're very nice. And I've got some internal photographs as well. And every night, wherever we stayed, the custom was, they called it the bush TV, because there was no TV or phone or anything. We were really, truly out in the bush. But there'd be a table and a fire, and you could rustle up a beer or a glass of wine if that was what you felt like. That's looking out over Lake Manyara. And the vehicle had a pop top, and you can see Festo's head down on the bottom here, and Sue's head up at the top here, but oops, what happened there? We would stand on our seats, take your shoes off first, and then had a wonderful view of what was going on. And you can see the edge of the van here. Sometimes we could almost lean out and touch the animals. Another part of the attraction of the Great Rift Valley is that it is the home of ancient humans. We're modern humans, and we're probably 150,000 years old, but these two gentlemen or statues here are two very ancient humans who grew up in the Great Rift Valley in an area called the Old Uvai Gorge, which sort of disappears into the mountains behind those. And the gentleman on the left is a member of a human ancestor called Homo habilis, who made tools. And the one on the right is Homo erectus. Homo habilis was about 1.9 million years ago, and Homo erectus about 1.2 million years ago. And he was the first one to stand up properly, put his shoulders back, and take his hands out of his pockets. And that's why he was Homo erectus. Giraffes as far as the eye can see, and a hippo who had had an extremely boring day. I must say I found the landscape and the landforms and the vegetation just as amazing as everything else. And this was a tree very close to where we spent one night, and the light in the tree was striking. And in acacia trees like this, you always find birds up at the top, and this is a family of marabou storks up there. And the bird life in general is amazing. It's called a lilac-breasted roller, and they're everywhere. They like magpies here. That was the bedroom. It had a net around it, not for discreetness, but to keep out flying pests. Beautiful sunrises, and this is every little camp had a sort of dining room tent and kitchen tent as well, and we got very extremely well fed. And up in the tree there, you can see a leopard. We were very lucky to catch up with the leopard. And a cheetah, fastest mammal. In fact, I think fastest animal on the surface of the earth. And she was just setting off to chase a gazelle, which she gave a good chase, but didn't actually catch. And we learned there that only, I can't remember what proportion of game chases are successful, but it's very low, like maybe 1 in 10 chases actually you come back with a dead animal to eat. We were extremely lucky here. These lions were as close as they look. They were probably, if our car was parked on the dotted line in the middle of the road, these guys would be on the footpath. And it's a male and a female lion. And in this shot, they courting. They were actually mating, and we were still there when the whole process was consummated. Looks kind of lacking in passion and tenderness, but strong on teeth. This was absolutely amazing. You've probably read about the migrations, and the big famous migration is actually about this time of year, a little bit further north in Serengeti, in a place called Masai Mara, which is part of Serengeti, but it's across the border in Kenya. But the wildebeest and other animals migrate all year round from place to place, and they follow the rain and they follow the grass. And we were very blessed to see this. This is a zebra migration, and as the lens pans around, you can see the snake of zebras disappearing off into the distance. And there, as Festo told us, there were probably about 10,000 zebras in this particular migration. And you can't really see it in this picture, but the expression on their face and the intensity in their eyes, you could tell that this is just an unbelievably primal, desperate mission to get to their next spot. It was extremely moving. You both had a tear in our eye watching this. And that's so the southeastern part of the whole area includes the Ngorongoro conservation area. And Ngorongoro is a crater, but it's huge. I think it's the biggest caldera volcano in the world. And the Caldera Volcano is a very shallow one on the whole. It's best way to think of it is like a blister in your skin that bursts. So it's very shallow. It's more sort of dug down into the earth, and it has a ring of mountain around it, which aren't very tall. And we were standing, when I took this shot, it was a very long day. So we got up well before sunrise, and we'd driven an hour or so to get to the rim of the crater. And for this shot, we were standing on the rim, just about to descend down. And that mountain with the sun behind it in the background is Kilimanjaro, which is basically at Arusha, just behind Arusha. The airport itself is called Kilimanjaro International. And that's the sun coming up Kilimanjaro. But to put it in perspective geographically, that is like watching the sun come up behind Ruapehu from Stockade Hill. It's 280 kilometers away. So you can imagine how massive that mountain is to see the sunrise behind it from 280 kilometers away. And this is inside the Ngorongoro crater. It's amazing. It's not that easy for the animals to get in and out. So they almost trapped there like a small micro ecology of its own. The hill behind is the start of the mountains that ring the crater. And there's just everything here. Down here, you've got some antelope called eland, and you've got lots of zebra, and you've got lots of wildebeest. And somewhere in here, it's a bit hard to tell. I think here you've got a buffalo. So there's just everything everywhere, getting on with it, eating the grass and thriving. And they're not at all scared. There's the buffalo decided to walk towards us. And it was wonderful having Festo, who was one of their more senior guides, because he knew everything. Every animal is in wherever an animal is, there's a good reason for it. It's not particularly random as you would think, or the untrained eye. And this is a sort of retired bull buffalo, and they hang around in groups of retired males and just enjoy a peaceful life. This is coming out of the park area, but still relatively rural. It's a very typical hunts. Even Arusha, which has a population of about 2 million, it's very spread out north to south and east to west, and most of the houses would look like this. Festo took us to some mates who put on a slap-up lunch for us. And this is a very typical setup for a house. The kitchen is separate to the living area, and it's outside on the whole, has a roof over it, but is otherwise mostly open to the elements. And it's built out of clay, and you can see these holes on the side. That's where they put in the fire. And then the heat from the fire just heats them wherever they are on this cooking surface. And all meals, even sort of family meals, run of the week will be made up of a number of different pots. And you can't really see, but here's some rice, and I think this one's a meat one, and this one is a spinachy type one. There we go. There's the spinachy type one. There's some meat. That's lovely stuff. I have a great taste for very hot chilies, and this is something called kachumbari, which is just lovely, but it does burn the roof of your mouth off. This is a sort of millety type thing. It's a cheesy type thing. So they eat extremely well and healthily and freshly. This is moving into a different area where there were elephants galore. And that's looking at the back of our tent. And I put that in. So the tent, it was just us two in that massive tent. So there was a lounge in the front, and then a double bed, and then there was like a dressing room. And then behind there was a toilet and bathroom. Well, toilet and shower, all canvas, no walls at all. And that little buckety thing you see hanging behind the tent is for hot water. So you could have a cold shower anytime. But if you wanted a hot shower, you had to order it. And one of the staff would somehow, no idea how, because that's a lot of water, boil up some hot water for you and bring it around in a cart and hoist it up onto that, and then we could have a hot shower. So we had a hot shower every morning and every night, because you get quite dirty there, but we did feel that we got our money's worth from hot water cartage. And our last night in the bush was amazing. There was thunderstorm to end all thunderstorms, and it went on for 5 hours. The tent held up, but lots of the road didn't. This was the river. It was just a tiny stream the day before, and not in this picture, but a section of probably half a kilometer of road that we drove to get to this place the day before had gone when we were getting away from it on this day. So we had to basically track through the bush itself, through tracks, and find our own way around where the road had been washed away. This is our van here. That's not Festo, that's the guy from the van before, all working out what to do. And it was more than one man's job to get that van in and out of this. We carried a lot of rocks and put them under the wheels when we got stuck. And I spent the morning literally mucking in and stomping around in my bare feet. And when we came out of the bush, we were literally struck by this tsunami of social and existential change. We went into the bush on the 9th of March when COVID was something we'd heard about. And we came out on the 19th of March, and literally the whole world had changed. Air travel was in chaos. We could tell something strange was going on because that last camp where we had all the rain, we arrived late because we'd had such a big day. And the whole staff was waiting for us when we arrived and said, we're sorry, we're late, blah, blah, blah. And Sue asked, so is the camp full? And they said, no, you're the only people here, because every night previously, the camps had been full, and that one, it was empty, and it was our last night. This dining room, I nicknamed this photograph the last tourist in Africa. That's Sue having dinner, and that's a massive resort. If you know the Wairaki resort down in Taupo, this resort was quite similar in layout. And that was part of the dining room, but we, again, were the only people staying in that whole resort. So we had to come to terms with the fact that our trip was going to change. And in the space of 4 hours, we decided we'd only go to Cape Town. There was going to be a wedding in Cape Town we were going to. So we cut the Cape Town leg of the journey down from 10 days to just 2 nights so we could attend the wedding, and we changed the English bit. That cost a bit changing airfares. And then within 2 hours, we realized that was going to be untenable. So the next morning from this dinner, I spent 2 hours on the phone with the customer service team of Ethiopian Airlines in Addis Ababa and got our tickets changed, sort of. And then we headed off to the airport, only to discover when we got to the airport that KLM had cancelled their flights instantly and forever. So there were 2 airplanes full of people waiting at the airport, and only one airplane, the Ethiopian, was going to leave. And when we checked in, and there were some amazing scenes there. We went to try and finish the changing of our tickets. They'd been largely changed, but not completely. And we went to the Ethiopian station manager's office, and it was just chaos there. And all of a sudden, this poor French lady just went completely bananas and started punching the Ethiopian gentleman, the Tanzanian gentleman who was the Ethiopian representative, started hurling her rucksack against the plate glass windows, and she just learnt that the changes to her ticket hadn't gone through. She was on the KLM flight, and that she wasn't going to go anywhere today, and who knows when she would. And her mother was quite ill, and then so she just lost it in every way. And because Sue's a very nice, my Sue's a very kind and safe-looking person, the Ethiopian gentleman said to just pick Sue at random out of the crowd and said, "Can you look after this lady?" Because everyone else was busy calling the police and what have you. They sat down and leant against the wall and had a big cry, and that all came right. And that act of kindness from Sue was paid back in spades, because when we were struggling to get onto the plane because our flights had been improperly corrected, he came wandering over and sorted us out. So we got to Addis Ababa airport, where we still had to make more changes to get into our plane. And this, in the top left-hand corner, is what Addis Ababa looked like in normal times when we were flying from Addis to Arusha. And this is what it looked like when we arrived at 10 p.m. on the 19th of March. Everybody in Africa was trying to get home somewhere, and Ethiopian Airlines is kind of the Singapore Airlines of Africa. Everybody who wants a decent flight into or out of Africa uses Ethiopian. It was just chaos. And I found the equivalent of the station controller in Addis Airport. Everyone was in their hivers or their high hazmat gear. And I found the office behind the scenes of the person who controlled the flights. And I have grandkids and love reading them, Thomas the Tank Engine. And there's a character in Thomas the Tank Engine called the Fat Controller. And the guy here, who was called Mr. Ahmed, and was absolutely spectacular at doing his job, was an extremely slender gentleman. So I kept it in my head, but I always, and to this day, think of him as the skinny controller. And all of those people behind me had an urgent need to get somewhere, America, Europe, somewhere else in Africa. And I got in front of his desk and he sorted us out and we got home safely. And that's the story. And that's Kilimanjaro as we were taking off and coming home. So any questions? Remember to unmute.
Would you go again?
Yes, definitely. But we've got other things on the wish list. But yes, it was an amazing place to be. Definitely a once in a lifetime event. But traveling in Africa is not for the faint-hearted.
Charles, did you have to undergo vaccination process for any, any diseases on that side?
Yes, we did. We had only one. We had to have yellow fever. And that was unbelievably expensive. That was $250 each for yellow fever. And we had to take, it wasn't so much vaccination, but we had to take anti-malarial tablets for 2 weeks before we left and 4 weeks after we got back, because malaria is endemic there. But you really feel like this is where the human species came from when you're there. And if you look around the world, Africa is the only place where they have big game like elephants and, that's not strictly true, but there's elephants and tigers in India. But on the whole, Africa has a greater preponderance of big game than anywhere else in the world. And that is largely because we evolved there together. So, whilst humans were becoming humans, there were already lions and tigers and baboons there. So they could develop strategies in their DNA to deal with things like us. But there were two waves of humans to leave Africa. There was one about 200,000 or 300,000 years ago, which became the Neanderthals in Europe and the Denisovans in Asia. And then modern humans left about 70,000 years ago, the first wave of which arrived in Australia. And wherever we went, we killed the big game. And they got killed because they didn't have strategies to deal with us. We were new.
Charles.
Yes.
It's Brenda.
Hello, Brenda. How are you?
I'm good, and you?
Good, thanks.
I did that trip almost, well, a little bit longer, obviously, than yours. And, I would do that trip again in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Absolute
heartbeat. It was just out of this world and just so Africa. And honestly, given the opportunity, I would be there. Boom, do it again. But obviously to come home under non-COVID circumstances. So I reckon it's a little bit in the distant future, but absolutely awesome. I went with myself and about 19 other Kiwis, and it was absolutely outstanding. Everyone on the tour just loved it. Everybody got up twice a day for their game drive, 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the evening. Not one of our party missed any of the game drives. It was fabulous.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely fantastic. And in a very funny way, we thoroughly appreciated our mad scramble home.
Yeah, I can imagine.
We could almost hear the doors slamming behind us. Singapore, we came from Addis to Singapore to Auckland, and we were in Singapore for 12 hours. And every now and again, we'd go for a walk around the airport and we'd look at those boards that they have up there and we just see them cancel, 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 cancel. And when we got on our Air New Zealand flight, it was the only flight on that board that didn't have cancel next to it.
Sure.
And 12 hours after we left, they closed the airport to transit passengers. So it was exhilarating in a scary sort of way. It's a bit like doing a black run when you're only a green run skier. But it also gave us such an insight into what it might be like to be a refugee.
Yes.
Completely powerless, just being buffeted around. It gave us a great respect for, or great sort of feeling of solidarity with people who might be refugees. I mean, for us, it lasted 24 hours, but for some of those people, it lasts decades or lifetimes.
Did you, when you got to New Zealand in the airport, did you have any sort of questions or testing about COVID?
No. We got back on the weekend before we went into lockdown on the Wednesday, and we knew we were going to have to self-isolate anyway. Didn't stop us getting Uber from the airport to town, but we were all kind of green at that stage. So we came home, went into self-isolation thinking we'd be there for 2 weeks, and ended up being there for 6 weeks. But no, there was a queue, and there was a nurse there and said, "Oh, you know about self-isolating, where you're going to be?" And actually, so good question. So there was somebody there. They didn't do tests or anything, but made sure we understood about self-isolating, found out we were going to self-isolate, took both our phone numbers, and we in that 2 week period before we came out of our personal self-isolation, we must have had 3 phone calls each from whoever makes those phone calls. So there was a certain amount of follow-up and yeah.
Any other questions, folks?
Semi-related, we see so much negative press about Africa generally, particularly the political situation. You spoke very highly of the Tanzanian tourism. Did you get any exposure at all to the political situation in that area?
No, not really, Chris. Festo was a big fan of the government of the time and painted a picture of great stability and happiness from all concerned. But when you talked to the kitchen staff or some of the sort of less socioeconomically endowed staff, they didn't have quite such a rosy picture. But it was very peaceful. There were a lot of police everywhere. There's police and road police and game police. So that's partially, I think, about employing people, but Tanzania itself seemed relatively stable. Brenda, do you want to comment?
Yeah, when we went, that was probably maybe about 2017-ish or 2016. The only place that was struggling a little bit was Nairobi. There was a bit of unrest and a bit of a struggle, but generally speaking, there was no drama. But I mean, you do go to the tourist spots, and they're staffed by the most amazing people. Kenya was just incredible, the people, but they didn't speak about their unrest, although they were very, very interested in New Zealand and what requirements you needed to come over to New Zealand. So there were lots of inquiries about that. How can I get to New Zealand? How can I get into New Zealand? Which I think ultimately was sort of a pipe dream and an if only dream to some of them, because they're so poor. But we didn't feel unsafe at all, apart from when we were going from the airport in Kenya to our one night stay over in the hotel. There was a bit of a, but other than that, no, we didn't feel any unrest.
No, I think definitely in Tanzania, and it's a long time since I've been in Kenya, but in Tanzania, I think you're probably as safe there as anywhere, but that's also because those people understand the value of tourism to their own livelihood.
Yes.
But, you know, if you look at Africa as dispassionately and from a spaceship, right now, it's a cot case. Neither Libya nor Somalia have a government. It's just, they're both run by warlords. Somalia hasn't had a government since 1989, maybe, when the last president was bumped off, and it's just been warlords and pirates ever since. Mozambique has got a ISIS uprising. South Africa's not in great shape. Guinea's just lost its government. Nairobi is still relatively unsafe. Nigeria is very unsafe. So you've got to understand what you're walking into. When we did that trip, as I said, we flew through Ethiopia, through Addis Ababa, and at that point in time, which is only 18 months ago, Ethiopia was kind of held up as what can be done in Africa with democracy and progressive policies. There was economic growth. Addis Ababa was steaming ahead. As I said, Ethiopian Airlines is the flagship carrier for the whole continent. And yet now, today, they're in a civil war. The two northwestern provinces have sort of broken away, and the central government can't really do anything about it. And people have been, food is the weapon of choice for the moment, access to food. So hundreds of thousands of people are getting skinnier and skinnier. So yeah, I think Africa is quite spotty between good and bad, but Tanzania is reasonably stable. Uganda's not that great. Kenya's okay, but got some issues.
I recently read an article about the Rift Valley and its separatism, shall we call it. How obvious is that separation that's in process?
Unless you knew it was there, Chris, you wouldn't particularly see it. It looks like a long valley. It's a bit like looking at the Hollyford Valley down in Southland. You know, it's a long valley basically with lowish. I was expecting higher mountains. I'd actually been there long ago when I was 5 years old, so 60 years ago. And I remembered these massive mountains, but I was just a 5-year-old. So they're relatively low mountains. It's in a way, the best way to picture it would be driving down the Hauraki Plains from towards Matamata, and you've got the mountains on the left. They're not even as high as those, but it's a similar feel.
It's funny how those mountains shrink as you get older, isn't it?
Yeah.
A fascinating insight to parts of the world that we'll probably never see, but hearing it direct from the horse's mouth, so to speak, makes it far more interesting than reading it or seeing it on video tubes and so forth, or whatever they call them.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions, folks? Well, if you have any that pop up when we leave now, please feel free to send them through to me, and I'm sure Charles will answer them, no problem. But thank you, Charles, for your time. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Has made me very homesick now. Thank you all, and lovely to see you. Please
Thank you,
stay.
Charles.
Yes,
Thank
thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Stay
Pleasure,
safe
thank
and
you.
see you soon.
Bye.
All the
Have a
best.
cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Yes.
Turn the recording off, Lee.